And good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Free Thought Forum. Apparently, they put us on a little early today. I'll be your host. We are put on by the Pennsylvania Nonbelievers. I'll be your host for the night, Jacob. And once again, I'm joined by Doug.
Greetings, everyone. Hope you enjoy the show.
Yeah, we got a bit to talk about tonight. We'll be starting a new series on philosophy. We'll be discussing various aspects of it. I'll also be doing a post-conference wrap-up. But to start with, I'm going to hand it over to Doug with a few reminders of upcoming events.
Okay, here are the upcoming events. We'll start with the meetings, okay? The Lebanon meeting, that will be on the 10th, and it starts at 7 p.m. The Harrisburg meeting on the 11th at 6:45. And the Chambersburg meeting on the 16th, starting at 7 p.m. Perry County meeting will be on the 18th of this month, starting at 6:30. Lancaster meeting will be on the 24th, also starting at 6:30. The York meeting for October has been postponed, or rather canceled, so we may do our event in Newport. Okay, the actual upcoming events are the Adams County Heritage Festival. That'll be on the 21st in the Gettysburg Recreational Park, and that'll be from noon to 5 p.m. Then the CLA Fall Crafts Festival on Cumberland Street in Lebanon, and that'll be on the 27th. And Newport Canal Days in good old Newport, PA. That'll be on October the 4th, and will be running from 9 a.m. to 2 p.m. So come join us at any of those events or any of those meetings, and we'll be glad to have you. Now, back to Jacob.
Thanks, Doug. Slight correction, the Newport Canal Days, if you'd like to come help for setup, that starts at 7 a.m., but the event itself starts at 9.
I didn't see that little addition.
Yeah. But it'll be our first event in Newport. Actually, I think it'll be our first event in Perry County. So we really wanted a good showing out there, and it should be a lot of fun. It's my hometown. It'll be really interesting to see. I would not surprise me to see a few people who I used to go to church with. It'd be a somewhat awkward experience, I'm sure of it. But before we get into our topics for tonight, I'd first like to wish good luck to Shannon Fields, one of our younger members, who is not only starting college this semester at Harrisburg Area Community College, but also is working on setting up a affiliate of the Secular Student Alliance, or a secular on that campus. And I think I lost audio there for a second. But she'll be starting a new branch of the Secular Student Alliance, which is the largest secular student group in the country, and really there to promote. Has a lot of the same goals that we do, which is to promote secularism, provide a community for those students, because there are quite a lot of religious groups on campus. I mean, Campus Crusade has been around forever, and they're all over the place, and there's always all sorts of other religious organizations on campuses. But this will be the first secular group, and this is, as I mentioned before, this is the largest secular organization for students. And I had the chance to talk with Shannon a bit about it this last Saturday, and she was really excited to bring it to the nation's capital. I'm sorry, not nation's capital, state capital. And I think that's always important to, sometimes it's, doing anything away from the capital can sometimes be a little bit harder for the politicians to recognize, which is usually why some of the campaigns we do are really focused at the state capitol, so the politicians can see what we're doing, or especially what she's going to be doing, which I really do wish her the best for that. But right now, I'll get into a little bit of the conference wrap up, which took place over this past week, over Labor Day weekend, out in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. It's our third. Was our third annual Pennsylvania conference, and it's not just put on by the Pennsylvania Nonbelievers. This is a multi-organization effort from organizations all over both Pennsylvania, and we also get support from national groups as well, such as the Freedom from Religion Foundation. We also like to thank Mark and Shannon Nebo of Be Secular for their contribution to PAN, coming from some of their profits from the conference. And Be Secular is a really important organization to promote the separation of church and state, and really, just trying to get that's their main aim, is just to mostly trying to get religion out of political discussions,
and to let the politicians know that we're there.
Right, and that's the thing. It's and one of the main messages is, even if you disagree with us politically, which I'm fine with, just make sure your reasoning for it is secular. I can. We're not, atheists won't say they're right about everything, especially politically. But it's certainly good to just make sure whatever you think, whatever you believe, or whatever your opinion is based on facts and secular reasoning.
Yeah, it's what the candidates are going to do for you, not what his God is going to do for you.
Right. Right. And one thing I really did enjoy the conference quite a bit, mostly because they had a wide array of speakers in diversity, not just among the speakers themselves, but also in the topics. It started out with John Loftus talking about his main book, The Outsider Test of Faith, which is mostly talking about methods by which we can criticize. Well, the main thesis of that book is test your own beliefs by the same criteria which you might reject any other one, which might seem like common sense, but he really was the one who formalized it, and he was actually a former student under none other than William Lane Craig.
Those are wise words, very wise words.
I mean, it's been a main argument for atheists for a while, but he was the one who just really rigorously formalized it and really put a major thesis out there for it. Another speaker we had that I kind of enjoyed was Jamila Bay, who is a reporter, and she's actually a Pittsburgh native, so it was nice for them. It was really good for the conference to get a native of, not only did we pull from, other people around the country, but there was also had some locals. She was mostly talking about community and how maybe the atheist community might be going through some growing pains right now, but which is expected. And I thought it was funny when she was saying, in Pittsburgh, the only thing you need for community is to wear a Heinz Ward jersey. Although I have to say, the Steelers had me kind of sweating this weekend. I certainly thought they might have thrown that game, and I thought we were on our way to another 8-8 season, which we still might be.
Yeah, season is young.
Yeah, and that's my concern, actually. Why can't we end this one win? But yeah, I mean, she talked a bit about just how we can find community anywhere, really. But I mean, other than that, there was a wide array of topics that were talked about at the conference. There was actually even 2 ex-Muslims there talking about various issues impacting that still impact either former Muslims or what's going on. Sort of an insider look at what's going on in the Muslim world.
Sort of Muslim in America sort of discussion all over the world.
I think they focus more on overseas, actually. Yeah. But you did bring up a good point. It's important to note that we look at the stuff that goes on overseas in the Muslim countries, but a lot of that stuff still does go on here in the United States, and it's actually quite shocking. Like in the United States, there's actually there are actually websites set up that where Muslim families use to make arranged marriages.
Yeah.
I mean, the idea that arranged marriages are still going on here in America is kind of baffling, but it really does go on.
Or beating a woman to death for being raped.
Right.
You know.
Right. I mean, that at least is illegal here, but I mean, there's still stuff they can, a lot of rights violations that were that go on. But actually, you bring up a point. One thing one of the speakers mentioned was how a frightening portion of women that were murdered in Muslim countries are actually killed by their own brothers. Mostly,
That's scary.
Mostly because of honor killings.
Yeah.
So-called honor killings, and that's the real worrisome part about any honor shame culture or any honor shame religion is that kind of stuff happens all the time, where people really get punished for not something they never did. And they were talking about how in those countries actually they've passed laws that in order for a woman to accuse someone of rape, they have to have 4 witnesses. Yeah. I mean, you can count on one hand how many times you're going to have 4 witnesses for that. I mean, as a result, there have been no rape convictions at all since those countries have passed those sort of things.
I think it's safe to assume that I would not attempt to rape someone if there were 4 people that were witnesses.
Right, and even if it started to happen, they'd have to stay there, and the requirements are ridiculously rigid.
Yeah. I mean, there are other groups, even the Jewish population, have got their shuns and everything, and their honors that figure into the way that they treat their women.
Right.
But I mean, they pale by comparison to the Islamic. I mean, the Jewish population, they don't go out beheading people or shooting their sisters like that. So
yeah, it's been brought up a couple of times that in Utah, most of I think the last statistic I heard was around 40% of the homeless are gay boys who have been kicked out of their homes.
That's a large number.
Yeah, I mean, as much as we talk about what happens overseas, it is really important to remember what still goes on in this country as far as religiously inspired bigotry and
intolerance.
Yeah, exactly. And I think that's one thing that's good about getting this wide variety of topics to talk about at these conferences is they bring attention to stuff we might overlook. I mean, I think the atheist community sometimes takes some criticism about focusing almost exclusively on mainline Christianity, which really, that criticism is legitimate. There's, we could be talking more about Muslims or Mormons or even Scientology has its issues. But other than that, they also had, just people from different organizations. I think there was also Anna Laura Gaylor from the Freedom from Religion Foundation. So there was just a good solid set of people, and also we had our fair share of entertainment. The conferences are also about fun. It's not just sitting here listening to speakers. There were a couple of entertainers, a couple of comedians. I even had a sort of magician come on and perform a couple acts. Although, being a skeptic, I already knew what his tricks were. Yeah, I mean that was the thing. Is when he was in the middle of doing a trick, I just kind of sat there like this, going, "I know how you're doing that."
Do we have a call?
Okay. Yeah.
That's okay.
We just heard some ringing in our ears, so that's what he was asking about.
don't forget that this actually is a live call-in show, and we value your opinions. So if you've got comments or opinions, give us a phone call. The number should be on your screen, and we'll take your call.
But one thing I'd also like to mention that was kind of an interesting experience was when I was leaving the conference, I actually had my car break down on, and what I have to say what was nice to see was there was a lot of our PN Nonbelievers members stopping to see if I need help. There was, I think, about 6 people stopped for me, which was, really was made. I can't even describe it. It was just like, knowing I have a community here of people who are looking out for me, which is, really why we do what we do. This is why we need community, mostly not just to do these events and the various things we do around the mid-state, but when somebody needs help, I know I've got a community here.
Well, that's the problem with a lot of the non-believing community. They don't realize that they have got this supportive community around them that they can call on. That they're not alone. There are a lot of people in the area that don't necessarily believe, don't go to church, like that. It's got a wide variety. I mean, we don't have just bingo, rabid atheists that are in our group. We've got people of every belief in there. There's probably some people that, the word I was looking for went blank. But we have a lot of people. Deists, sorry, that was it, deists, which I sometimes describe myself as an agnostic deist. So,
well, it depends on how you define both of those words. But,
yes, I define it to my benefit.
But yeah, so overall, like the whole event for the whole car breaking down. I mean, you also have to realize it was just coming out of Pittsburgh on Labor Day weekend. So yeah,
I pick a worse time.
Yeah, it could have ended very, very badly, but I mean, even the tow truck driver did a lot to help me out. Actually, got me towed all the way back to Newport,
which is a long haul.
Yeah, but considering the alternatives, it was actually the cheapest option.
Yeah,
because that's one thing you have to think about. Well, if I stay here and try to get it fixed, I'm going to have to wait till Tuesday, which is 2 nights in a hotel, which can get rather expensive over Labor Day weekend. So,
oh yeah, everyone's booked, and they're charging top rate.
Right. So I mean, it was thanks to the help of especially Brian Fields, who has, like, with his AAA membership, was able to get me at least some of that mileage covered, and get a tow truck driver out there pretty quickly. And even the tow truck driver himself was like, they apparently they didn't want it. There was a company that didn't want to do it at first, and he was kind of lobbied to get me to get me home that night. Although I'd like to say it was out of the goodness of his heart, but I think he just wanted overtime. Well, which is fine. Which I mean, if you think
either way, it works.
Yeah, I'm not complaining. And sometimes when you think about morality, sometimes there's no way to get around the fact that it's a little bit selfish, no matter which way you cut it.
Oh, it's big selfish.
Yeah. It's hard not to get away from doing good just for selfish reasons. It really is hard. But next year's conference will be actually back in the mid-state. We've like to move it around the state. The first one was in Harrisburg. The second one was in Philadelphia. This one was in Pittsburgh, and now we're going to be bringing it back to Central PA for the next year, which we expect to be sometime in late September. We don't have an exact location yet. Hopefully, we'll know that by the end of the month. But we've got a very solid planning committee that I think I definitely trust that they're going to do a good job with it.
And there's a lot to be planned and to be done. Having one of these conferences, you don't just say, "Hey, let's have a conference," and everything falls into place.
Right. And then you've got limited budgets, and sometimes to get certain speakers, you have to hope they're in the area, so you don't have to pay too much to get them there. Mm-hmm. And it's really a lot to work out. And I really do have a great deal of respect for people like Brian that do have so much to do when these conferences are there.
In addition to his regular job.
Right. Right. I mean, that's the thing. With the atheist movement, there are very few people who do this for a living. Yeah, very, very few people.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's something that we'd like to change at some point, but really, there isn't much money in the atheist movement.
Now, when we say that we're a non-profit organization, we mean we're a non-profit organization.
Right. And if you'd like to help fund these conferences, I don't have unfortunately, I didn't think to write down the website. But if you look at, I think there's a GoFundMe page for an organization we're trying to form to mostly run these conferences. And I think it should be on the PA Atheist Conference website, which you can find just by Googling.
Mm-hmm. And of course, you look for a 501c3 organization, which makes your contributions tax exempt.
Right, and so I think that's about all I have to say on the conference for the moment. So now we're going to move on to the topic of philosophy. It's a subject I've been wanting to talk about on the show for a while. And the problem is it's such a broad topic. Obviously, we're not going to cover it all in the 30 minutes left in the show. But so we'll probably do a couple of segments of it over the coming months. And I should say, take what we say as a grain of salt, because Doug and I aren't professional philosophers by any means. But that really doesn't matter. I think it's something where you can, if you're really serious about learning it, you can learn a lot of the basics, at least, to be able to use it well. And I think that's important, and that's part of the reason why I think everybody should learn at least the basics of philosophy, because just like there are scientists out there with legitimate science degrees who will bend and distort science to mislead the public, there are also philosophers out there doing the same thing, where they'll present arguments that are either unsound, built on fallacies, and really just making mistakes that no professional philosopher should. Well, they're out there doing it not just as mistakes, but doing it intentionally to mislead the public. So really, it's really good to learn it just to protect yourself from these bogus claims. Just like in science, it's important to know a little bit about it so you can protect yourself from the many dubious scientific claims out there.
And there are a ton of them.
Right. And although I have to say, I understand why people don't like to get into philosophy, because it's not that easy to get into, mostly because it's badly publicized or popularized. I mean, that's one thing that science does really, really well. Is we have series like Cosmos or a variety of books out there that are written for the lay audience so that they can understand. Maybe you don't know all the ins and outs of it, but you can at least get the gist of it. Mm-hmm. Philosophy has a terrible time doing that. I think most of the reason for that is they tend to more focus on the history of philosophies or biographies of famous philosophers over time.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is the way that I originally got into it back in the Stone Age. Yeah. There, and all they would thought about was Plato and Socrates and everything, which are not that relevant now, but it
Right.
was nice to know. And I'm not up on modern philosophy, much to my detriment. But before this series ends, I will get myself up to date.
Right, right, and that's the thing. That's, you know, I've sometimes picked up books of philosophy and just gone, what is this? But that's why I wanted to talk about, you know, some of the things that I've learned, and, you know, maybe how to approach it without trudging through a lot of the thick jargon, which sometimes is all that philosophy is sometimes. But I think I should start off by saying, well, what are we talking about philosophy? Because it is a blanket term. You know, just like in science, where you have, not only in science science is you know, physics, it's, you know, cosmology, biology, thermodynamics, all these different subcategories. Well, the same can be said for philosophy. Now, I've seen the categories of it broken down in a bunch of different ways, but they really can be broken down in different ways. But for the most part, it comes down to the categories. I'll just run through the categories first. They're epistemology, science, metaphysics, aesthetics, ethics, and politics. Now, what epistemology is really your methods. You know, how do you go about knowing? How do you go about discovering the truth, or, you know, how to discover the facts about something?
Not what you discover, but how you go about it.
Yeah, how do you go about it? I mean, that's the one thing about philosophy, is it's not only is it a body of knowledge, but just also methods, much the same way science is.
An approach.
Yeah, an approach. You know, approaches, and that's what epistemology is. And I'll go into that deeper in a future episodes. But, you know, for example, you know, historians have all kinds of methods of how they evaluate claims, how they scrutinize claims, or, you know, if you look, you know, our court of law has, you know, a specific process by which they extract information from the witnesses, from the evidence. You know, there's this big process that they go through, and that's what your epistemology is. And those can be refined over time, discarded, or revised, just to try to improve it based on the outcome of our actions. And the second thing is science. And the funny thing about that is, until the 1800s, really even in the mid 1800s, science was not thought of as anything different than philosophy. It was philosophy for a long time, actually. You know, up until that point, major scientific finds were still published in philosophy journals, and people, and really the only difference between science and philosophy, even into the 1800s, was really on the quality of data they had.
Yeah.
And I even heard someone say that point blank was, in reality, science is philosophy with better data.
Yes.
Which is actually a very good summary of it. I mean, it's not completely precise, but I think that's a fairly good assessment of it. And really, and then that's especially prevalent when you get into something like metaphysics, which is really what you do after the science is done. You know, this is like hypothesizing, theorizing. An example of this is Lawrence Krauss's book, A Universe from Nothing, because he doesn't prove his points in that. What he does is he takes the best data they've got and shows, okay, this is why we think this is even plausible, you know, going into the details about, you know, the geometry of the universe and how all of that's consistent with a universe that can come from nothing. But the second half of his book is he's going into how that happened, but it's not proven beyond to any scientific degree. But he's showing, you know, all the different all the different things that they're thinking about, and that's metaphysics. That's philosophizing about the data. I mean, it's not like they weren't out there to prove anything, but just to, you know, discuss what the latest ideas are.
To examine it.
Right.
You know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
To do an analysis and really come up with the best things we can talk about.
Assumptions can be your worst enemy.
Right.
Really, so.
And I think that's what a good epistemology does, is it exposes your assumptions.
Yeah.
And that's really what the scientific method is all about, is exposing any assumptions, any flaws in logic, errors, or data. And I mean, assumptions aren't necessarily a bad thing, but you have to be careful of them, and you have to put them on display so people know what they are.
Yeah, and you can't blindly adhere to them. I mean, if you ask a question, you have to be prepared for the answer that you may or may not get, and it may or may not be the one that you want to hear. But if it's the truth, then I'll get into another subject there, how we define truth. But
right, and that's an important question. Then you have things like aesthetics, which is what is beautiful, what is what do we like to look at? I mean, not just art, but all sorts of different types of art. You can't scientifically prove what good art is, but it's still a discussion to be had. We can still discuss about what we like, what we don't like about it. And even if I even think about, it might sound like nothing more than an opinion at first, but if you look at, say, two movie critics talking about a movie, when they're trying to say which movie is better than another, they'll point to specific spots in the movie, which are themselves facts. Different pieces of editing or acting, which can be objective facts, but they construct an opinion out of those facts.
Yes.
And that's what I think is important. One of the important things about philosophy is, there's a lot of opinion involved, but you have to realize that those opinions have underlying facts that we can talk about, that some people will try to, and if your opinion is not based on facts, then it's a worthless opinion. You have nothing to substantiate it. So there's no reason we should accept it.
You have to start with what you believe are the facts.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And if they turn out to be wrong, then we can have a conversation about that. And I mean, that's the same way with science. Is we don't accept a science unless you can substantiate the facts. Sometimes we might
and reproduce it.
What's that?
And reproduce the results.
Right. Right. That's the thing. And then you also have things like ethics, which we can get into a big conversation about morality there. And I think that's one of the bigger topics we always talk about is, well, what's the right thing to do? It's hard to scientifically prove that, to prove those things to a scientific precision or a scientific certainty, but they still have basis in fact. There's still arguments about the reality of our world. And so that's why it's important that it's really important that we have good, honest discussions about them based on the effects of what each action has and with the repercussions of it and how that reflects on us as a society. So, I mean, and that's a whole nother field we can get into.
I know people have asked me at times, hey, are you living in reality? And I go, yeah, I hope so.
Yeah. I mean, if you don't want to drift into solipsism there. But that's on the subject of solipsism. I was talking about saying one of the things I was discussing before the show, why it's important to know a little bit more about philosophy. And to do that, you need to look no further than the Matt Dillahunty Sci-10 Bruggencate debate, which we talked about in an early episode, where I heard someone describe it perfectly when they said, Sci-10 Bruggencate is a philosophical train wreck, because he doesn't understand the basics of arguments and how to present an argument, what the difference between deductive and inductive reasoning is, and how to form how sound arguments work, where you have to substantiate every premise of your argument to that, and that's something I'll get into a little bit in another episode, what all those things mean.
And arguing from the top down or the bottom up,
right,
as in deductive and inductive reasoning.
Right. That's the thing. And unless you understand. And there were points in the debate. It was very clear that he did not understand what any of that was, or was relying on other people not understanding it, which is, well, again, that's one of the things you have to do to protect yourselves. Or I've seen, say, William Lane Craig, who's actually has a degree in philosophy and is supposed to be a professional philosopher. Mm-hmm. In some of his books, he's engaging in circular reasoning, or what they call an argument from incredulity, which is where you say, I don't understand it, therefore it isn't true, which is a fallacious argument. Mm-hmm. So that's the thing. It's like, that's why you shouldn't be intimidated by philosophy, is because even those people who are supposed to be professionals sometimes don't get it right.
But, you can also say that it goes both ways,
right?
For both religion and for science, for the people that are adhere to one discipline or the other. I mean, we will turn around and say, well, we don't necessarily understand your concept of God and creation. And they, on the other hand, will turn around to us and say, well, we don't understand your ideas on evolution, or how something could have started from nothing, so therefore it couldn't possibly exist.
Right. But, well, I should say, sometimes we say things like that rhetorically, mm-hmm. but you bring up an interesting point. If we're going to talk about it, mm-hmm. we should say what we really mean, which is, the way your God is depicted is incoherent and self-contradictory, which cannot be logically true. Mm-hmm. So that's why it's, like I said, sometimes we say, well, I don't understand it. Sometimes we do understand it, but we're just saying that rhetorically. But what we do mean is your argument, what you're arguing for cannot logically exist, and here's mm-hmm. why. And I think if you take that seriously, you can have a much better conversation that way, and just kind of avoid the rhetorical devices that really won't get you anywhere. Mm-hmm. But the final branch I was going to talk about is politics, which, again, that's another thing. On the surface, it might sound like opinion, but really it is a lot more than that. It's when we talk about, say, what our economic policy should be, mm-hmm. we're basing those all on data about what past economic policies have done. Mm-hmm. or predictions about what they do in the future. So these are all based in fact, although it's hard to, we can't prove to a scientific accuracy economic theory.
It is a mathematical sort of a thing.
Right. But we can't say it with absolute certainty.
Yeah.
But we can sort of construct, well, what do we think is the best possible thing we can do here?
Yeah.
Now, of course, you also have social issues, all kinds of things along the spectrum. We could also talk about things like, Marxism, or all the other different political philosophical schools, and how they've been applied over the years. And those are all based in, and we can break those down and show what they've done in the past, and kind of try to construct what would be the best thing for us to do now. Mm-hmm. And that's really a philosophical discussion. Now, the problem with politics is you will quite often run into confirmation bias, mm-hmm. where people just look for arguments that support their own position and don't really pay attention to the ones that oppose it, which I think is one of the main problems in our politics today, is just how much confirmation bias is coming into it. But those are, in a nutshell, the categories. As I said before, I've seen some sources break them down slightly differently, mm-hmm. but those are the basic sources. the basic categories. And we'll be talking about them a little bit more individually in coming shows, but we just kind of wanted to do an overview here. And another thing I want to talk about is the progress of philosophy, because as I said before, far too often they talk about just the history of philosophy and not where it's gotten to this point. As Doug mentioned earlier, some of these early philosophies are completely irrelevant today.
Yeah.
One example is the idea of dualism.
Yes.
Yeah, where if you don't know what that is, it's some philosophers argue that your mind and your body are two separate things.
Yeah.
But science has laid waste to that idea.
And your mind, as part of your soul, can exist in two places at the same time in the realm, which we just say is another way of saying heaven, but not actually say it, or either the realm or the world, like that. And it's just so totally changed. One of the old philosophers will say this, and then the next philosopher will say, well, yeah, that's partly right, but then this, then the original philosopher, Plato and Aristotle went back and forth with their philosophies.
Right.
And...
yeah, and that's the thing, if you're just publishing biographies about these people, you don't get what the debate was and how... It's not like these people. It's not like we should take whatever Plato says as absolute truth, because a lot of his ideas have been either revised or abandoned, and the same could be said for a lot of the philosophers throughout history, or at least they made kind of a small contribution. Well, think of it like this: one of the greatest. I like to draw a lot of parallels to science because I think there's some good parallels between the two. And as again I said before, philosophy and science weren't two different entities for the longest time. But let's say you had Sir Isaac Newton, one of the greatest scientific minds in history. But his theory of gravity had holes in it. He put together what he could observe as far as how he could predict gravity. But his theories of gravity don't work everywhere.
Yeah.
And that's when Einstein came along with relativity. Well, we have similar ideas emerging throughout philosophy. One example is the principle of falsification, where before there was kind of anything goes in philosophy. If you couldn't disprove it, maybe we should still consider it. But as we went into the 1900s, there was kind of a desire to kind of get rid of all of that, and that's when they started into the idea of, well, maybe if we can't verify it, then it's meaningless. But the problem they ran into when philosophers were working out this problem was, how do we define when something has been verified? Because there are different levels of evidence that we always point to. Like, for example, the evidence you might accept somebody saying is going to be different than what, say, the court of law would accept or what science would accept. And unfortunately, not everything we accept can meet that high standard. So it turned out verification was problematic. So what then later philosophers did was say, okay, maybe let's look at the other side of that. Let's say if something can't be falsified, it isn't meaningful, and if I could make a claim, but if there's no condition by which it can be disproven, then it doesn't mean anything. Like I could say there's an invisible elephant in this room that doesn't weigh anything. Well, how do you test that? I mean, you can't even even disprove it. So that's the kind of thing that some philosophers have gone through, and really the idea of falsification, where something has to be vulnerable to disprove, is really become one of the cornerstones of science. And it's something even Carl Sagan was talking about in the original Cosmos, how important it is that science be make claims, definite claims that can be disproven, that are vulnerable to disproof under certain conditions.
Yeah, which is one of the main complaints that we have with religion. You know, it's all opinion, and there is no real proof there, and they can't prove something any more than we can disprove.
Right, and if you think about it, the idea of God has changed so much over time that they're like, well, okay, you know, as our understanding of the world has changed, essentially they've taken God and went like, okay, let's bend him and get him to fit into reality.
Yes.
By making unfalsifiable claims about him. And I remember one former preacher was talking about that, and he said one of the things when he became an atheist, he realized that there was no coherent definition of God.
Mm-hmm.
So that's why the principle of falsification is so important. Is, you know, the mere fact that you leave something vulnerable to disprove and it hasn't been really strengthens your claim.
Mm-hmm.
You know, maybe you haven't completely verified it yet, but the fact that it still hasn't been disproven, even though it's very vulnerable, is, you know, why we keep even considering it.
If you don't mind, I would just like to read a quote from Spinoza, an early philosopher, which I absolutely love. I only remember about half of it, but it says, when you say that if I deny that the operations of seeing, hearing, attending, wishing, etc., can be ascribed to God, or that they exist in him in any eminent fashion, you do not know what sort of God mine is. I suspect that you believe there is no greater perfection than such as can be explained by the aforesaid attributes. I am not astonished, for I believe that if a triangle could speak, it would say in like manner that God is eminently triangular, while a circle would say that the divine nature is eminently circular. Thus, each would ascribe to God its own attributes and would assume itself to be like God and look upon everything else as ill-shaped. Isn't that really basically what mankind does? You know,
right? I mean, they form it to their own expectations.
Yeah. And so, I mean, yes, of course, you know, God looks like us and talks like us and everything. Yeah, because we created him, and not vice versa. Yeah. But
now I'll come back to some of these other progresses I've laid out here, but I really want to get into some of the starter resources that I found very helpful for getting into just more basic philosophy that you can find, you know, applications for in everyday life. The first of which is a book called The Philosopher's Toolkit, which you're seeing right now. This is really just goes down through a lot of the basic terminology and ideas about philosophy and how you can apply it in your everyday life. It talks about things like deductive versus inductive reasoning, how structured arguments are constructed, also a lot of the various principles and other things that I've detailed throughout I've talked about a little bit about.
And it starts at the basic level.
Yeah, at the basic level. It's just really get you thinking about it, and that's really what philosophy is about. Is really teaching you how to think and really how to articulate your thoughts and structure them a little bit more coherently. Is, I think, one of the one of the more important things. So that's a really good book for doing that. It hits on all the different points, just enough to get you an idea of what's going on.
And you can also get it, that book, through our website. Want to tell them about how to do that? If
you go to PANonbelievers.org and just click on the Amazon link, if you buy that book, either it's available in paperback or Kindle, and it will a portion of the cost will go to funding our organization at no cost to you.
Yes,
Amazon will pay us for that. But that's the other thing you can look at is there's a video on YouTube called "Is Philosophy Stupid?" Kind of a provocative title, but it's by Richard Carrier, who's a pretty renowned author and atheist, and it's on the Hambone Productions YouTube channel, which also does Skepticon videos. That I've mentioned them a few times, but he does a very good introduction, really talking about the basics of philosophy and really why there's a lot of negative opinions about philosophy today, and kind of addressing them. And really at some points he says, a lot of these criticisms are well founded, about how they're not popularizing it well. They're not doing the things they should be. Philosophers are not doing the things they should be doing very well. And it's not like he's the first one to say this either. I think there was a book in the early 2000s called Philosophy: A Field in Crisis, where they discussed all the different problems that's facing philosophy as an academic field of study.
But I will say that when I took my first college course in introductory philosophy, I must admit my first reaction was, this is stupid. And then you get into it, and it starts to get interesting, and then it gets hard.
Yeah.
And you really study like heck, trying to memorize it and maintain it. But then you'll get to a point that what you're doing is that you're actually trying too hard. Okay? And with philosophy, what you want to do is you actually want to read it, relax, and let your thoughts flow. You don't force it. If you go, oh God, I gotta think this out, it'll never come to you. You have to just relax and go with the flow. Right,
and that's and the most important part of philosophy is just being able to think through a topic, and it's a lot about how to think. I mean, there is a body of knowledge, but I think the most important part is how to really think through the thought process, and don't be afraid to ponder a question for a long time. That's, I think, what was it Bertrand Russell said something to the effect, we should put a question mark on things we've always taken for granted.
Yeah,
I think that was Bertrand Russell, but
we rush through everything when we should just pause and take our time.
Yeah, and the final thing you can look at if you want to start getting into it is if you're into blogs. There's a blog by a man named Dan Fink. It goes by the name Camels with Hammers. Actually, Dan Fink gave a speech at this last conference on the philosophy of morality that I thought was very, very interesting. And he's actually a philosophy professor. He's a regular blogger too. Probably one of his more famous blogs he's put out recently is he absolutely ridiculed the film God Is Not Dead, because it really strawmans philosophy professors who are atheists, and he kind of pretty much he felt it was directed straight at him, and he just goes through why everything about what they say is wrong, and how what philosophy professors do. And that's really, if you want to get into that, and, really maybe have some discussions with a philosophy professor, I would check out his blog.
Also a good thing, if ever you see advertised anywhere someone is holding a Socrates cafe, I participated in a few of those. We used to have some at Pan as well, and it's where a bunch of people will get together and will throw ideas or questions into a hat, and then pull one question out, and everyone in the group then will philosophize about that. And you don't interrupt people. You let them play out, and everyone has their turn. And it's a great thing. I learned that from my good friend Socrates. We grew up together. And they named the cafe after him, where we sat down and did this.
Yeah, that's one of the things. It's philosophy is just like science. It's something you do.
Yeah.
And actually, I was talking to Dan Fink at the conference, and that's one of the things he said is it's hard to learn philosophy without actually doing philosophy. Mm-hmm. And I think that's a pretty good point. And that's why I think it's important. Is I think it's really helped me work out not only what I think about certain things, but the more important thing is why I think that way. Mm-hmm. And really helping expose my assumptions about different things and maybe fallacious thinking, and just seeing things formalized, I should say. Mm-hmm. That's something sometimes that might seem. Sometimes it seems like philosophy is saying things that should be common sense, but really they formalize it a lot more rigorously, and realize at some point, let's not take for granted that some of the things we talk about today weren't always common sense.
Yes.
I mean, we benefit from some great minds of history that have done the work for us. For example, I was going to say one of the progresses in philosophy is consequentialism in ethics. I mean, we talk today about, when we talk about morality, we talk about, what's the consequences of my actions? But that wasn't always the case. Mm-hmm. Usually it came from authority or from other thinking. And if you think about it, it's so powerful that even, say when Christians talk about homosexuality, it's not just the Bible says it's wrong. Then they try to make up all sorts of different consequences for that.
I can't remember who the heck said it, but someone said that common sense was not very common.
Right, exactly. And
it's in short supply.
Right, and we're gonna have to wrap it up here very shortly. Again, our next show is on Tuesday, September 23rd, and we'll continue some philosophical discussions as well as anything that's going on within the organization. Once again, I'm Jacob, and this was Doug.
Doug.
And thanks for joining us. We'll catch you next time.